They laughed when the single dad asked to transfer $8 million. 5 minutes later, nobody in the bank was laughing anymore. The downtown branch of Crescent National Bank was unusually busy for a Tuesday morning. The polished marble floors reflected the bright glow of overhead lights, and the steady rhythm of keyboards, ringing phones, and quiet conversations filled the air. Customers stood in line clutching deposit slips and coffee cups while employees moved with the practiced confidence of people who believed they had seen everything. Then the front doors opened, and Ethan Walker stepped inside. At first glance, he looked completely ordinary. His faded denim jacket had clearly seen better years. His boots carried traces of dust from long hours on the road. A simple baseball cap shaded tired eyes that belonged to a man who had spent more time taking care of others than himself. In one hand, he carried a worn leather folder. In the other, he held the hand of his 11-year-old daughter, Lily. She smiled up at him as they approached the customer service desk. Ethan smiled back. It was the kind of smile only a devoted father could give, warm despite exhaustion, steady despite whatever burdens he carried. Behind the desk, a young teller greeted them politely. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" Ethan slid the folder onto the counter. "I'd like to initiate a wire transfer." The teller nodded. "Certainly. For how much?" Ethan glanced at the paperwork. $8 million. For a moment, the sounds of the bank seemed to blur together. The teller blinked. Once, then twice. "I'm sorry," she said carefully. "Did you say 8,000? Ethan shook his head. $8 million. The young woman stared at him, uncertain whether she had misheard or whether this was some kind of joke. She forced a nervous smile and looked toward the office overlooking the lobby. A few minutes later, Gregory Steele, the branch manager, emerged. He adjusted his expensive suit jacket as he approached the counter. His confident smile faded the moment he saw Ethan. Gregory had spent 20 years in banking. In his mind, he could estimate a customer's worth within seconds. The clothes, the watch, the shoes, the posture. He believed he knew exactly who belonged in a private banking office and who did not. His eyes moved slowly over Ethan's worn jacket and dusty boots. Then he looked at the transfer form. $8 million. Gregory actually laughed. Not loudly, just enough for nearby employees to hear. "Sir," he said, folding his arms, "there appears to be a mistake." Ethan remained calm. "No mistake." Gregory smiled again, this time with open amusement. $8 million is a significant amount of money. Lily shifted slightly beside her father. Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I know exactly how much it is," he replied. The manager glanced toward several employees who were now openly watching. A few exchanged smirks. Someone quietly chuckled. Gregory leaned closer. "Perhaps we should verify a few things first." Ethan simply nodded. "That's fine." What none of them noticed was the subtle change occurring on a computer screen behind the counter. A system notification had quietly appeared. Then another. And somewhere far above the city, a phone was about to ring. The notification appeared so quietly that nobody in the lobby noticed it. A small red banner flashed across a monitor behind the counter, then disappeared almost as quickly as it had arrived. The teller frowned and refreshed the screen. The same warning appeared again. Meanwhile, Ethan stood patiently beside Lily as Gregory Steele continued examining the paperwork with growing skepticism. The manager tapped the transfer form against the counter. "These kinds of transactions usually require private banking approval," he said. "Not everyone can simply walk in and move that kind of money." Ethan nodded politely. "Then I am sure we can follow whatever process is necessary." Gregory expected frustration. He expected defensiveness. Instead, he found himself annoyed by Ethan's calmness. It was the same calmness that often unsettled people who were accustomed to judging others too quickly. Lily looked up at her father. "Dad, is this going to take long?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "Maybe a little while, sweetheart." "Will we still make it?" she asked. "We will." He did not explain further, but his answer carried complete confidence. Across the lobby, a few customers continued watching. Curiosity had begun replacing amusement. There was something unusual about the man standing at the counter. Most people who were embarrassed in public became nervous. Ethan seemed completely unaffected. As Gregory reviewed the documents again, his attention drifted to Ethan's leather folder. It was old but carefully maintained. The edges showed years of use. Inside were neatly organized papers, each page perfectly arranged. Nothing about Ethan suggested carelessness. In fact, everything about him suggested discipline. Gregory ignored the thought. He preferred the version of reality he had already created in his mind. The teller cleared her throat nervously. "Sir, there is another notification." Gregory waved her off. "Probably a system error." She hesitated. "It says executive authorization required." Gregory rolled his eyes. "For a wire transfer request that has not even been approved? Impossible." He leaned toward Ethan again. "What exactly do you do for a living, Mr. Walker?" The question sounded casual, but everyone nearby knew what he was really asking. Ethan answered without hesitation. "I run a small consulting business." Gregory smirked. "A very successful one, apparently." Ethan simply smiled. Lily tugged lightly on his sleeve. "Dad, yes. Can I sit down?" "Of course." He guided her toward a nearby chair and removed his jacket, placing it over the backrest so she would be comfortable. Several people noticed the gesture. It was small, ordinary, but there was a quiet kindness in everything he did. As Lily settled into the chair, she pulled out a library book and began reading. Ethan returned to the counter. Not once did he complain about the delay. Not once did he raise his voice. The atmosphere in the bank continued to shift. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Computer keys clicked in the background. Somewhere a printer started running, then stopped. Behind the counter, the teller's eyes suddenly widened. A new message had appeared on her screen. This time it was impossible to ignore. Her face lost all color. She looked at Gregory, then back at the monitor, then at Ethan. "Sir," she whispered nervously, "I think somebody from corporate is trying to contact us." Gregory laughed under his breath. "About him?" The teller swallowed hard. "Not exactly." She turned the screen slightly toward him. For the first time that morning, the confidence began to disappear from Gregory Steele's face. Gregory stared at the screen for several long seconds. The red notification remained fixed in the center of the display, impossible to dismiss and impossible to ignore. Around him, the ordinary sounds of the bank continued, but they suddenly felt distant. The teller shifted nervously in her chair. "Should I answer the call?" she asked quietly. Gregory straightened his tie. "Not yet." His voice sounded less confident than before. He looked toward Ethan, who remained standing calmly near the counter while Lily continued reading her book. Neither seemed aware of the tension building behind the scenes. Or perhaps they were aware and simply did not care. Gregory preferred that explanation. It felt safer. A second notification appeared. Then a third. Executive priority account. Immediate review required. Gregory frowned. He had worked at Crescent National for nearly 2 decades and had never seen that sequence before. Still, pride is a powerful thing. Instead of admitting uncertainty, he doubled down. "There is obviously some kind of technical issue," he announced loudly enough for nearby customers to hear. A few people glanced over. Gregory forced a smile. "Our systems occasionally flag unusual requests." The teller looked unconvinced. Ethan remained silent. That silence bothered Gregory more than any argument could have. Most people in Ethan's position would have become defensive by now. They would have demanded respect. They would have insisted they were being treated unfairly. Ethan simply waited. Gregory folded his arms. "Mr. Walker, perhaps while we sort this out, you could provide additional documentation." "Certainly," Ethan replied. He opened the leather folder and calmly handed over several documents. Gregory accepted them with an exaggerated sigh. He intended to expose inconsistencies. Instead, everything appeared perfectly organized. Tax records, verification forms, identification documents, business filings. Every page was neat and complete. Gregory flipped through them faster. Surely something would not add up. Yet the more he reviewed, the more frustrated he became. Nothing appeared suspicious. Across the lobby, customers had started paying closer attention. Human curiosity is powerful. A few people moved closer without realizing it. An elderly man lowered his newspaper. A woman waiting for an appointment stopped scrolling through her phone. Even some employees had begun watching openly. Gregory could feel their eyes. The pressure made him defensive. "You know," he said with a small laugh, "most people do not casually transfer this amount of money on a Tuesday morning." Ethan nodded. "Most people probably do not." A few customers smiled at the answer. Gregory did not. He leaned against the counter. "What exactly is the purpose of this transfer?" Ethan glanced toward Lily before answering. "A promise." Gregory blinked. "A promise?" "Yes." That was all Ethan offered. The simplicity of the answer somehow made the room quieter. Lily looked up from her book and smiled. He always keeps his promises. Several customers exchanged glances. The little girl's confidence sounded genuine. Gregory immediately redirected the conversation. Well, banking procedures require specifics. Ethan remained calm. The details have already been included in the paperwork. Before Gregory could respond, the teller's phone rang. Then another phone rang at a nearby desk. Then another. Heads turned throughout the branch. Employees began checking their screens. One by one, confusion appeared across their faces. The teller answered first. Her expression changed almost instantly. "Yes, sir," she said. "He is here." A pause. "Right now." Her eyes widened. She slowly lowered the receiver and looked at Gregory. The manager felt a knot forming in his stomach. "Who was that?" he asked. The teller swallowed hard. "Corporate headquarters." The room seemed to hold its breath. Then she added 3 words that made Gregory's confidence crack completely. "They are sending someone." The words hung in the air long after the teller finished speaking. "They are sending someone." A simple sentence. Yet it changed the atmosphere inside the branch more effectively than any alarm could have. Gregory Steele forced a smile, but it looked strained now. "Corporate sends people all the time," he said. "There is no reason to overreact." No one answered. The employees returned to their screens, though very few were actually working. Most were watching Ethan. The customers were watching too. The quiet curiosity had grown into something larger. People sensed they were witnessing a story unfold, even if they did not yet understand it. Ethan remained composed. He glanced toward Lily, who had already finished several pages of her book. "Hungry?" he asked. She nodded. "A little." Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a granola bar. "Good thing I planned ahead." Lily smiled. "You always do." The exchange was simple, but several people noticed it. There was something reassuring about the way Ethan spoke to his daughter. No stress, no frustration, no sign that the strange situation around them bothered him at all. Meanwhile, Gregory walked briskly toward his office. The moment the door closed behind him, he turned toward his computer. He needed answers. Fast. He typed Ethan Walker's name into multiple internal systems. Most returned limited information. Then one screen finally loaded. Gregory leaned forward. A gold symbol appeared beside the account profile. He had never seen that symbol before. Another message appeared underneath. Restricted executive access. Gregory frowned. "What does that even mean?" he muttered. He clicked deeper. Access denied. He tried again. Access denied. A third attempt triggered another warning. Immediate review authorized by executive office. Gregory felt a bead of sweat form near his collar. Outside his office window, he could see Ethan sitting beside Lily now. The father and daughter were quietly talking about something. Lily laughed softly. Ethan smiled. Neither looked remotely concerned. That confidence was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. The office phone rang. Gregory answered immediately. Gregory Steele speaking. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Mr. Steele, this is Rachel from Executive Operations." Gregory straightened in his chair. Executive Operations rarely contacted branch managers directly. "How can I help you?" "We need confirmation that Mr. Ethan Walker is currently present at your location." Gregory hesitated. "Yes." "Good. Please ensure he is comfortable." Gregory blinked. "Comfortable?" "Yes." A brief pause followed. "Has his transaction been completed?" Gregory looked through the glass at the lobby. "Not yet." Silence filled the line. The kind of silence that carries disappointment without ever raising its voice. Rachel finally spoke again. "Please do not delay any approved requests." Gregory swallowed. "Of course." The call ended. He sat frozen for several seconds. Nothing about this made sense. If Ethan was truly important, why did he look like an ordinary working father? Why drive an old pickup truck? Why wear a faded jacket? Gregory had built his career around reading people. Yet every assumption he had made this morning seemed to be unraveling. Back in the lobby, another employee suddenly gasped. Several screens across the branch refreshed simultaneously. New instructions appeared. Staff members exchanged nervous looks. One junior banker stood up so quickly that her chair rolled backward. The atmosphere shifted again. Not fear. Not panic. Respect. Quiet, unmistakable respect. Gregory stepped out of his office just in time to hear one employee whisper to another. "Whatever this account is, it is connected directly to the executive floor." The words landed like a stone in still water. Gregory's stomach tightened, and for the first time all morning, he stopped wondering whether Ethan Walker was important and started wondering exactly how important he really was. Nearly 30 miles away, on the 42nd floor of Crescent Financial Tower, Victoria Hayes was standing before a wall of glass overlooking the city skyline. The morning sun reflected across neighboring skyscrapers while a dozen executives sat around a polished conference table reviewing projections for an acquisition worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Charts glowed on large screens. Analysts presented forecasts. Lawyers discussed timelines. Normally, Victoria commanded every room she entered. Today was no different. She listened carefully, asked precise questions, and noticed details others missed. That attention to detail was one of the reasons she had become chief executive officer before the age of 40. Then her assistant quietly entered the room. The interruption alone was unusual. Victoria glanced up. The assistant approached and placed a small note beside her tablet. Most executives would have ignored it until the meeting ended. Victoria did not. She read the message once. Then again, her expression changed instantly. The room noticed. Executive meetings often survive bad news. What unsettles people is unexpected emotion. One board member stopped speaking mid-sentence. Another lowered his pen. The assistant remained standing. Victoria looked up. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." The assistant nodded. "The verification has already been confirmed." Victoria closed the file in front of her. The sound echoed through the conference room. "Continue without me," she said. Several executives exchanged confused looks. One senior director leaned forward. "Victoria, the acquisition call begins in 20 minutes. Then you have 19 minutes to prepare." Her tone was calm but firm. Nobody argued. She gathered her phone and walked toward the exit. The assistant followed closely behind. Once outside the conference room, Victoria's pace quickened. "How long has he been waiting?" she asked. "Almost an hour." Victoria stopped walking. "An hour?" The assistant nodded nervously. The branch escalated the matter only recently. For the first time that morning, genuine disappointment crossed Victoria's face. She resumed walking. "Faster now. Get transportation ready immediately." Meanwhile, back at the branch, the tension continued to build. Employees moved carefully, speaking in lower voices than before. Nobody knew exactly what was happening, but everyone sensed that something significant was unfolding. Ethan sat beside Lily near the lobby window. Sunlight streamed across the polished floor as she closed her book and stretched. "Dad," she asked. "Yes." "Did something go wrong?" Ethan smiled. "Not at all." "Then why is everyone acting strange?" He looked around the room. Nervous employees. Curious customers. Gregory pacing between offices. Ethan chuckled softly. "Sometimes people become uncomfortable when they realize they made assumptions." Lily thought about that. "About us?" Ethan nodded gently. "About lots of things." She leaned against his shoulder. "You are not upset?" "No." "Even after the way they treated you?" Ethan looked toward the counter where Gregory was once again checking his computer. Everyone deserves a chance to do better once they know the truth. Across the room, Gregory received another call. This time the number displayed executive office. His pulse immediately accelerated. Gregory Steele speaking. The voice on the line was concise and professional. "Mr. Steele, this is the office of the chief executive officer." Gregory stood straighter. "Yes. The chief executive officer is personally en route to your branch." Gregory nearly dropped the phone. "Personally?" "Correct." A brief silence followed. Then came the sentence that completely changed the morning. "Mr. Walker is to be treated with the highest level of courtesy and respect until her arrival." The call ended. Gregory stared at the receiver. Around him, the branch suddenly felt much smaller. Because for the first time all morning, he realized the person coming was not being sent because of a transaction. She was coming because of Ethan Walker. 20 minutes later, the entire branch seemed to be operating on a different rhythm. Conversations were quieter. Movements were more careful. Even the steady hum of the building felt subdued, as though the walls themselves were waiting for something. Gregory Steele had personally ordered fresh coffee, bottled water, and pastries to be placed in the private client lounge. The same lounge he had not considered offering to Ethan earlier that morning. Now he found himself standing beside the doorway, rehearsing apologies he was not yet ready to deliver. Ethan remained seated beside Lily, completely unchanged by the growing attention around him. While employees whispered and checked their screens, he helped his daughter solve a math problem from a workbook she had pulled from her backpack. If the train leaves at 2 o'clock and travels 60 miles per hour, Lily began. Ethan smiled. Then what do we need to know next? She laughed. Dad, you always answer questions with questions. That is because the right question usually matters more than the first answer. Nearby employees overheard the exchange. One teller quietly shook her head. Nothing about Ethan matched the image Gregory had created earlier. There was no arrogance, no demand for special treatment, no attempt to impress anyone, only patience, quiet confidence, and the unmistakable presence of a father who cared deeply about the little girl beside him. Outside, a line of black vehicles turned onto the street. The first employee to notice them froze. Then another. Within seconds, people near the front windows were exchanging nervous glances. Gregory looked outside and felt his stomach tighten. He immediately recognized the lead vehicle. Executive transportation. The car slowed to a stop along the curb. Driver stepped out first. Then senior corporate staff emerged. Customers who had no idea what was happening instinctively turned toward the entrance. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath. Gregory adjusted his tie again. His hands were no longer steady. The glass doors opened. Victoria Hayes entered the branch. She wore a navy business suit and carried herself with the calm authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Every employee immediately stood straighter. Several greeted her respectfully. She acknowledged none of them. Her eyes moved through the room with purpose. Searching. Gregory stepped forward quickly. Ms. Hayes, welcome. I can explain the situation. Victoria did not slow down. Can you? She asked calmly. Gregory opened his mouth, but found no words. She continued walking. Employees parted without being asked. Customers stepped aside. The room grew quieter with every step she took. Gregory assumed she would head toward the offices. Others assumed she would review the transaction first. Nobody expected what happened next. Victoria walked directly past the executive lounge, past the management offices, past Gregory himself. She crossed the entire lobby until she reached the seating area near the windows. Ethan looked up. Lily smiled immediately. Victoria's expression softened in a way nobody inside the bank had ever seen before. For one brief moment, the powerful executive standing in the center of a multi-million-dollar institution looked less like a chief executive officer and more like someone who had finally found a person she deeply respected. The silence that followed was complete, because every person in that branch realized they were about to witness something that would change the entire morning. No one moved. No one spoke. The entire branch seemed frozen in a moment that stretched far longer than it actually lasted. Victoria Hayes stopped directly in front of Ethan Walker. The chief executive officer of one of the most influential financial institutions in the country stood silently for a second, her eyes meeting his. Then, to the complete shock of everyone watching, she smiled warmly and said, "Good afternoon, sir. I am truly sorry we kept you waiting." The silence that followed was absolute. Gregory Steele felt the color drain from his face. Several employees stared openly. A customer near the entrance actually lowered his coffee cup halfway and forgot to take a sip. Lily looked up at her father and grinned. Ethan stood and offered Victoria a polite nod. "Good to see you again, Victoria." Not Ms. Hayes. Not Chief Executive Officer. Victoria. The familiarity alone sent another wave of confusion through the room. Victoria glanced toward Lily. Her expression immediately softened. "And you must be Lily. I have heard wonderful things about you." Lily smiled. "Dad talks about you too." A few employees exchanged startled looks. The chief executive officer knew the little girl's name. Gregory suddenly felt very aware of every word he had spoken earlier that morning. Victoria turned back toward Ethan. "I understand there were some delays." Her voice remained calm, but the meaning beneath it was impossible to miss. Ethan smiled gently. "Nothing. We cannot fix." The answer seemed to relax her slightly. Then she looked around the room. Her gaze moved across the employees, the customers, and finally settled on Gregory. The branch manager swallowed hard. Victoria did not raise her voice. She did not appear angry. Somehow that made the moment even more uncomfortable. "Mr. Steele," she said calmly, "would you join us?" Gregory approached carefully. The confidence he normally carried was gone. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria folded her hands in front of her. Would you like to explain why Mr. Walker's transaction has not yet been completed? Gregory opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He cleared his throat. There were verification procedures. Verification procedures? Victoria repeated. Yes. Interesting. Her tone remained perfectly professional. Because executive authorization was already attached to his profile before he entered this building, Gregory felt his stomach sink. Around them, the branch had become so quiet that even the distant hum of the air conditioning seemed loud. Victoria continued. And according to our records, multiple alerts were generated instructing staff to prioritize his request. Gregory lowered his eyes. Ethan stepped forward slightly. Victoria. She looked at him immediately. Yes, sir. The word struck the room like a thunderclap. Sir. Not as a courtesy. Not as a formality. It carried genuine respect. Everyone could hear it. Everyone could feel it. Ethan smiled. I did not come here to create problems for anyone. Victoria nodded. I know. People make mistakes. Gregory looked up in disbelief. After everything that had happened, Ethan was defending him. Lily slipped her hand into her father's. Victoria noticed and smiled faintly. That sounds exactly like you. Then she turned toward the employees. Many years ago, before any of you knew my name, there was a person who taught me something about character. The room listened carefully. Victoria looked directly at Ethan. He taught me that the measure of a person is not found in their title, their clothes, or their account balance. It is found in how they treat people when nobody is watching. For the first time all morning, Gregory realized this story had never been about $8 million. It was about a man whose value could not be measured by any number on any screen. The branch remained silent as Victoria's words settled over the room. Nobody interrupted. Nobody checked a phone. Even the customers waiting for their own appointments seemed unwilling to break the moment. Victoria glanced toward the large windows overlooking the city street, and for a second her expression drifted somewhere far beyond the bank itself. 10 years ago, she said quietly, none of this existed. She gestured around the branch. Not this building. Not the company people know today. Not the success everyone assumes was inevitable. Ethan lowered his eyes slightly, already knowing where the story was headed. Victoria smiled faintly. Back then I was 28 years old, trying to keep a small financial technology startup alive. Investors were leaving. Debt was growing. Every expert I spoke with told me to walk away. Several employees exchanged surprised looks. They had never heard their chief executive officer speak so personally. Victoria continued. I spent 6 months trying to convince people to believe in an idea that nobody thought would work. One by one, doors closed. Meetings ended. Opportunities disappeared. She paused. Then someone introduced me to Ethan Walker. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Ethan looked almost uncomfortable with the attention. Lily smiled proudly beside him. I expected another investor, Victoria said. Someone wealthy. Someone interested in ownership. Someone who wanted a percentage of the company. She laughed softly. Instead, a man in a pickup truck showed up carrying a notebook. A few customers smiled. The image felt strangely familiar. He listened for 2 hours. Victoria continued. He asked questions nobody else asked. Questions about people. About values. About purpose. Everyone else was studying spreadsheets. Ethan wanted to know how the company would help families. Gregory listened without blinking. The story unfolding before him sounded nothing like what he had imagined. Victoria looked at Ethan. At the end of the meeting, he gave me the best business advice I have ever received. Ethan shook his head modestly. You did the hard work. No, Victoria replied. You changed the direction. The room grew quiet again. 3 months later, the company survived because of a strategy he helped design. 1 year later, we became profitable. 5 years later, we expanded nationally. She smiled. And every time I offered him stock, ownership, or executive positions, he said no. Several employees looked stunned. Refusing ownership in a company that became worth billions sounded impossible. Victoria seemed to read their thoughts. I asked him why. Her voice softened. Do you know what he said? Nobody answered. Victoria looked down at Lily. He said there were already enough people chasing money. He wanted to spend his time raising his daughter and helping people who needed a second chance. Lily squeezed her father's hand. Ethan smiled but said nothing. The fluorescent lights hummed quietly overhead. Outside, traffic moved through the city as though nothing remarkable had happened. Yet inside the branch, perspectives were changing. Not because of wealth. Not because of status, but because everyone was finally seeing the truth. The $8 million transfer was never the extraordinary part of Ethan Walker's story. The extraordinary part was that he had the opportunity to become far richer than anyone in the room could imagine and chose something else instead. He chose time. He chose family. And he chose a life built on quiet dignity rather than recognition. For several seconds after Victoria finished speaking, nobody in the branch said a word. The silence felt different now. Earlier, it had been the silence of confusion. Now it was the silence of understanding. Gregory Steele stood motionless near the counter, staring at Ethan Walker as though seeing him for the first time. The expensive suit, the title, the office, the authority he had relied upon all morning suddenly felt much smaller than they had before. Ethan, meanwhile, looked exactly the same. Calm, humble, unchanged. Victoria finally turned toward the operations desk. "Let us finish what Mr. Walker came here to do." Employees moved. Immediately. Not because they feared her authority, but because they finally understood the importance of the man standing beside her. Documents were processed. Verifications were completed. Approvals appeared within minutes. The transaction that had been delayed for nearly an hour was finalized with surprising speed. One senior banker personally delivered the completed paperwork. "Everything is ready, sir." Ethan accepted the folder with a grateful nod. "Thank you." No lecture followed. No celebration. No victory speech. The simplicity of the moment somehow made it even more powerful. Lily looked up at her father. "So we are done." Ethan smiled. "We are done." Her face lit up immediately. "Then we can still make it." Victoria laughed softly. "Make what?" Lily looked excited. "Today is the first payment for the new community center." Several people nearby looked surprised. Ethan had never mentioned where the money was going. Lily continued proudly. "The center is going to have tutoring rooms and music classes and a place where kids can go after school." Ethan gently squeezed her shoulder. "And a lot of good people helped make it happen." Victoria smiled. Suddenly, the purpose of the transfer became clear. The money was not buying a mansion. It was not funding luxury. It was not increasing Ethan's lifestyle. It was helping families, helping children, helping people who needed opportunities. Gregory lowered his eyes. Every assumption he had made that morning now felt painfully shallow. Slowly, he stepped forward. "Mr. Walker." Ethan turned toward him. Gregory took a deep breath. "I owe you an apology." The room grew quiet again. Gregory continued. "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I saw your clothes. I made assumptions. And I was wrong." Ethan studied him for a moment. Then he smiled. Not a triumphant smile. Not a superior smile. Just kindness. "Thank you for saying that." Gregory looked surprised. "That is all." Ethan nodded. "People learn. That is what matters." The words landed harder than any criticism ever could. Victoria watched the exchange carefully. A small smile appeared on her face. It was exactly the response she expected. Ethan gathered his folder. Lily grabbed her book. Together, they started toward the exit. Employees moved aside respectfully. Customers watched quietly. Near the door, Victoria spoke one last time. "You know, Ethan, after all these years, you still manage to teach people without trying." Ethan chuckled. "I am still learning myself." The afternoon sunlight spilled through the glass doors as he and Lily stepped outside. Father and daughter walked toward an old pickup truck waiting at the curb. No cameras followed them. No headlines announced their departure. Yet inside the branch, nobody returned to normal right away. They simply stood there, watching until the truck disappeared into traffic. Because sometimes the strongest person in the room is not the richest, the loudest, or the most powerful. Sometimes it is the person who never needs to prove any of those things at all. And long after Ethan Walker was gone, the quiet dignity he carried remained behind, teaching a lesson no balance sheet could ever measure.